Hello, I'm Mick. So, Megan McGee, or Megan Emma Silverstein now. I was born in Brooklyn to Catholic parents. I'm part of a new generation in which both parents work. However, this was before daycare and affordable childcare became widely available. As a result, growing up on New York streets, I spent a lot of time alone. I needed to learn how to stand up for myself. I was always athletic, perhaps a little bit of a tomboy, and I ran miles every day. Running was my way of coping, my method of releasing frustration. But I did have a soft side. Seeing people in pain and truly hurting moved me, perhaps too much in the long run. I suppose that was a good thing, but I am getting ahead of myself. Despite my strength and athleticism, I never saw myself as attractive, and I knew others would agree if I didn't figure it out for myself. Many people were happy to remind me. I've never bothered chasing boys. I just did not have the confidence. My face had flaws, and my muscular build did not meet the standard for how girls were supposed to appear. Whatever. After high school, I got a job as a waitress in Manhattan and rented a small studio near Central Park. I continued my morning run while working the lunch shift. Junior waitresses did not get the higher-paying evening shifts right away. I was making a living. I was surviving, but I felt lonely. Running helped me take my mind off of it. A year later, I finally got the night shift. It meant more money, but also later nights. I would not get into bed until 1 a.m. sleeping till noon. My runs have shifted to the early afternoon. That is when I first noticed him. Every day, toward the end of my run, I'd see the same man. A broken man with no one to turn to. But I wasn't the type to get overly emotional and offer him a shoulder to cry on. That was not me. However, as the weeks passed and I continued to see him, he began to irritate me. I mean, it looks great on me. Then one day, I asked a cop who was always on patrol in that neighborhood about him. You have no idea who he is? The cop asked. So, I suppose you wouldn't. That's Gregory Silverstein. Who the hell is that, Mac? I asked. He is the man, but who? The cop paused. His wife was apparently a crazy shrew, and he watched as she shoved his son in the sun, fell down a flight of stairs, and died. He testified at her trial, and watched as she was executed. Apparently, she had been abusive to him for years, and he just accepted it for that boy. He snapped. I mean, it was all over the news. How long ago was this? I asked. Oh, gee. It must have been 6 or 7 years ago, he said. I kept ignoring him. I tried to convince myself that he wasn't my problem. I told myself this repeatedly, and with increasing frequency. I realized it had become my problem. The next day, after making the decision to get involved, I approached him. Mac? I asked softly. He did not seem to hear me. Hey, Mac, I said more sharply. He looked up at me. Be cheerful. He looked at me with sadness and irritation. For a moment, I thought he was going to physically attack me. I wasn't really worried. I was a strong woman, and he was about 50 years old. It looked like he hadn't eaten in months. Leave me alone, he growled. I stared back at him, absorbing all of his sadness. I was never going to be able to handle it. No way, Mac, I said. I've been watching you for weeks, and I'm not going to put up with it anymore. He was completely taken aback when I extended my hands to him. I took them and helped him stand up. He came willingly. Then an idea struck my mind. It may not have been the nicest thing to do, but something told me it was the right thing to do at the time. I led him to the fountain. He looked at me with pure confusion. Come on, Mac, I laughed. You should lighten up with that. I pushed him into the fountain just for fun. A few moments later, he emerged, soaked and even more perplexed than before. If that was possible, I couldn't help but look like a drenched puppy. I burst out laughing, and he did too. A few minutes later, as he climbed out of the fountain, earning stern looks from some nearby cops, his laughter continued, and for the first time in a long time, it felt good to simply laugh. Feeling better? I asked Lady. That was the first time I had laughed in a long time. Dear God, it has been 7 years. Seriously? I asked. Yeah. Thank you. My pleasure, I replied. And I intended it. Please return to my house for a meal, he requested. This is the least I can do. I was hungry, poor, and broke. What could I do but accept? Sure, Mac, but only if I know your name. Greg. He said so. The cop was correct. Greg, like most New Yorkers, took frequent walks. So we started walking towards the west side of the city, away from the park. We walked several miles, talking about nothing in particular. He seemed much more cheerful, which made me very happy. We soon found ourselves walking down a street lined with brownstone mansions, and I was completely taken aback when we arrived at a 3-story plus half-raised basement, double wide on what must have been 45 feet of width, with alleys on both sides, and walked up the stairs. If that surprised me, I was even more taken aback when he unlocked the door and opened it into the largest, grandest foyer I had ever seen in a private residence. Because that is what it must have been. The floor was all marble, with a staircase that must have been 8 feet wide, taking up the entire back center of what must have been a 40-foot deep by 20-foot wide room. The room was 2 stories high, with a balcony-style railing that overlooked roughly 3/4 of its perimeter. Rooms were also made of marble, and located off to the sides. He smiled as I hurried from room to room. One of them had a pool table, but the rest appeared to be variations on living rooms. Everything was ornate except for the bathroom, which was enormous and featured ornate marble fixtures and gold-colored plumbing. Each of these rooms contained several large radiators. He then walked me back past the stairs, and I quickly realized that this massive foyer only took up about half the depth of the house. I walked down a hall beneath the stairs to a massive hall that was at least 10 feet wide and led past 2 rooms. One on each side. One was obviously a dining room. The other one was probably a ballroom. In the back of both of these rooms was a large kitchen where a man and a woman were working on what smelled like a delicious meal. On one side of the kitchen, there was a 6-person table for eating, while the rest of the kitchen featured very traditional or old-school appliances. "Oh, young Mr. Silverstein," the man said, "you didn't tell me we were having guests over for dinner. I would have made something a little fancier." "It's okay, James. I'm sure whatever you're making will be sufficient," he told him. James plated the meals, and we were served by a woman named Arlene. Then they both descended a flight of stairs to what I assumed was the basement. "I had no idea you were rich." I expressed my confusion. "Oh, please do not patronize me," he said. "And, frankly, I'm as poor as a church mouse." "How could you?" I started. "Do you think money equals wealth?" He barked at me. "Money is just money. Wealth is having people in your life who care about you. The only people who ever cared about me are no longer alive." He had begun crying again. Really crying. I got up from my chair and wrapped my arms around him. He was older than my father, but he needed comfort, which I tried to provide. "I apologize," he said. "It's fine, Mac," I said. "But, dear God, I don't think I have a fountain to dunk you in right now." He smiled at me, even though he was still upset. "I'm not sure what I can do to thank you," he said. "I can't thank you enough for simply making me laugh." It felt for a brief moment as if someone out there cared. I raised my hand and slapped him hard across the face. He looked up at me, puzzled. "You idiot," I yelled at him. "What do you think? Do you think I would have approached a random person in the city of depraved lunatics, who could have slaughtered me, and attempted to break him out of his funk? Because I don't care about others." "I apologize," he stuttered. "You should be." I told him because I cared. Every day, I ran by you, watching you cry and cry. Perhaps I have too much empathy. Maybe my heart is too big. But after a while, I started to care. And today, I cared so much that I intervened with a stranger in Central Park. I had no idea you were rich. And I didn't realize you were respected. I honestly didn't know. What can I do to repay you?" he cried. "First of all, stop crying." I snapped, but he looked down at the floor, so I had to stop yelling at him. "I apologize," I said. "It makes me angry that you were so upset. Caring is invisible, even when it exists." "No, I apologize," he replied. "Now, please tell me what I can do to repay you for your help." I was lost in self-pity. "I just turned off for 7 years. You've just turned me on again. What can I do?" "You know what, Mac?" I said, "for how lonely you are. I have spent my entire life alone, just because I am ugly. The best thing you can do to repay me is to become my friend." "You're ugly," he said. "In any case, you are beautiful to me." "Bullshit," I said. "But will you become my friend?" Of course he smiled. I left my house that night. Of course. I liked the old man for some reason. We started meeting at the park every day, and I stopped running. We simply walked together and spoke slowly. We began to pick up the pace, eventually running together. He seemed to be getting back in shape. One day, he asked me where I worked because he wanted to take me to dinner. It was his birthday. I explained that I worked nights as a waitress, and that he could not take me out to dinner. He then offered to pick me up for brunch the following morning from my house. I accepted. My apartment is small, dingy, and, well, I admit it. It is a slum. I was embarrassed, but I tried to clean it up so that it looked presentable when he arrived. And this happened about a year after we met. He saw the apartment I was living in, and appeared shocked, but kept his thoughts to himself. He took me to the famous steakhouse Sparks for lunch, and the food was delicious. At the end of the meal, he was looking at me intently, contemplatively. "Call your boss," he said. "Call in sick today." "I can't," I said I needed the money so badly. How much would you have earned today? He asked bluntly. I do not know. $15. I expressed my confusion. He took $20 out of his wallet and gave it to me. I was about to say something about how I resented him offering it to me, when he cut me off. Please, he said. I just want you to give me the birthday present I want. And what is that? I asked. A little of your time. Okay, I replied. I was a little concerned when we returned to his house. He took me upstairs for the first time, and I was very concerned. Walking up those massive marble stairs seemed to make him sick, and I had no idea why. He led me into a room that I call a library, or an office. He sat me in a massive leather wing chair across from a flickering fire, while he took the other seat. I've never told you the story about my wife, he admitted, did I? Some cop told me it was about your wife slaying your son or something like that. That's part of it, he explained. He then began telling me about Rochelle, a girl who worked for him. He'd been excited. He was only in his 20s, so this was to be expected. She eventually convinced him to have sex with her, and she became his secretary. One day, she came into the office and informed him that she was pregnant. She persuaded him to marry her. The problem with her, as the psychologist later discovered, was that she was both a little psychotic and a classic psychopath. She wanted to marry in order to gain access to what she saw as a fortune. Greg didn't have a fortune. The business provided him with a good living. However, he did not become rich. She was furious when she realized what had happened. At this point, he offered me a drink. He gave me a cognac, brandy, which I had never had before, but I quickly developed a strong liking for it. She immediately stopped having sex and transformed into the greatest shrew the world has ever seen. There was money in the family, but it belonged to his grandparents. He then told me about his mother and father, including how his father strangled his mother in a drunken rage and how the state executed him for it. He also told me about his grandparents, who took him in and raised him. He was never spoiled. Despite living in such a large house, he was never spoiled, even though they had servants. Even then, he was expected to clean his own room, store his toys, and perform household chores. Not only that, but their servant, James, who had lived here with his now deceased wife since Greg was a child, knew how to cook. His grandmother did the majority of the cooking, and she loved him like he was her own son. When he graduated from high school, his grandfather gave him enough money to launch a small business. That business had grown enough that when he married Rochelle, he was able to move out into his own apartment. She resented the fact that she wanted to live in a mansion. Still, Rochelle didn't seem to care about her son, and even blamed him for all of her pregnancy pain. Greg loved him wholeheartedly. When his grandfather died, he was completely devastated. It was like losing his father and mother all over again. But Rochelle freaked out when she discovered that the entire fortune was going to his grandmother. Greg just took it. A few years later, his grandmother died. All he had was his son. Oh, and his grandparents left him $25 million in this house. But he wasn't concerned about the money. He loved the house, though. The only thing that was important to him was his son. His son was both the soul and the event horizon in his life. Rochelle quickly came up with ideas for how they would spend the money. Greg had very different ideas. He intended to keep James, his daughter Arlene, and her husband Joe in their long-term positions. He intended to save the money so that he could leave enough money for his son to keep the house up until his death, allowing it to remain in the family for over a century. This meant that because the Goliath building cost a lot of money to maintain and tax, money had to be saved. She wanted to buy jewelry, travel by herself, and so on. They fought endlessly about this. If it hadn't been clear that she didn't want to abandon Benny, his son, he might have given in. But he fought for his son. Then one night, there was a larger fight. He wanted to send his son to Harvard. Benny had gained access, and Greg was willing to pay for it. Rochelle wasn't. They had a big fight, and Greg eventually put his foot down, raced down the stairs, and planned to go out. Rochelle then summoned Benny to her, saying she wanted to talk to him about college. When he approached her at the top of the stairs, she shoved him, and he fell down the hard marble stairs to the bottom, his head landing with a huge crash on the hard marble floor. He had died. Rochelle then suggested that since he no longer needed to inherit the house, Greg could allow her to spend more money. That was why he couldn't look at the stairs without getting a little queasy. Greg used all of his willpower to avoid strangling her. He called the cops. She was arrested. He testified against her during the trial. His testimony was the only clear evidence. She was so cold, and he was so passionate and clearly distraught, that the jury believed him. He forced himself to witness her execution. He was aware that he had put her there. He thought it was just. However, he also believed that if he was going to be responsible for the end of a human life, he had to witness that end. And he did. It initially provided him with some closure, but he eventually broke down. His son had died. His wife's death did not bring him back. He realized he was a monster just like her. And that had led to his terrible depression, which I had helped him get out of. Then he told me about his business and how he hadn't been involved in it since his wife died. It had been run by his office manager's secretary. She was a good woman, and he realized she cared about him and the people he hired. So she did her best to keep the business profitable. He didn't have anyone to replace her lower down the ranks. He didn't know who he could trust with it or who had the necessary qualifications. Then he thought of me. "Are you crazy, Mac?" I asked him. "I do not have a college degree. I know nothing about business. I'm not very smart." "Bullshit," he said. "First and foremost, I do not have a college degree. Second, you don't have to know anything about business. I would not want you to marry. And I will teach you everything you need to know about the business. Other businesses are irrelevant. What is it about you that caused you to drag me off a park bench and then shove my massive frame, which is larger than yours, into a fountain? I'd call it Hotspur," he said. "But this is because I was raised by a woman who spoke Yiddish fluently. Rochelle would call it unmitigated gall, but the majority would call it audacity." I looked intently into his eyes. He was alive again, which made me happy. "Very happy. I'll accompany you to look at the place," she said. "But I haven't agreed yet." "Okay, fair enough." He stated, as he did, that the huge and extremely ornate tall case clock in the office struck, indicating that it was 2 a.m., because it's late and we'll be going to the same location tomorrow. He let me go across the hall to a guest room. It wasn't exactly a guest room, but rather a guest suite. It was quite spacious, with a large bathroom that included both a shower and a clawfoot tub, a large sitting room, a powder room, and so on. I slept very well that night. The elevator served every floor of the house, including the basement, first, second, and third floors, as well as the gardens and solarium on the rooftop. Breakfast was delicious, but the dish he had for breakfast perplexed me. It resembled a purple version of Eggs Benedict. We walked out of the house to the B train stop. We transferred at 42nd Street to the F train, which took us to Avenue Y in Brooklyn. We walked through the flea market, and he pointed out the area where his business operated. It was quite hectic, I must admit. Then he led me to a building, where we walked up a flight of stairs to an office suite. There was a waiting room in the front of the office, staffed by a young woman who appeared to be a standard-issue secretary. Greg walked past her to a room labeled private, which turned out to be his office manager. Secretary's office? I've met her. She was an old lady. After a lengthy discussion about the business and responsibilities, he led me back into his office. He sat in the boss's chair, and I sat across the desk from him. "Will you accept the job, Meg?" "I'll do it if you agree to take the job." But that was all he said. "And what about the other thing? How much does the job pay?" $40,000 per year, including health insurance and a pension plan." "What?" I asked pointedly. "Oh, God damn it," he exclaimed. "Listen, when I spend time with you, whether we're talking or having fun, well, I'm happy. And when you're not there, I'm sad. And I've sold the house with all of its extra space." I replied with a smile. He appeared shocked. Within a few weeks, I'd moved into the massive third-floor guest suite. First and foremost, it featured 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. One opens into a sitting room, while the other is in the largest of the 3 bedrooms. We converted one of the bedrooms into an office for me. It even had a decent-sized dining room where I could host guests if I wanted to. I may have been across the hall from him, but I was actually in a small apartment with food service rather than living in his home. Mary taught me the ropes quickly. I discovered that I had a talent for managing and finding good employees, as well as a talent for firing bad employees. I enjoy the job, but there was more to it. After working and living like this for 6 months, I realized Greg was my best friend. Not only my best friend, he was a great person, a really nice guy. But not only that, he quickly became my only friend, and I was falling madly in love with him. After approximately 8 months, I began flirting with him. At first, he ignored the hint. Then he became defensive and reminded me that he was older than my father. I kept trying, and gradually his defenses crumbled. But I am not, and have never been patient. So one day, I grabbed his chair and yanked it away from his desk, then moved around in front of him and pushed it against the wall. He looked up at me with a mix of fear and surprise. He wasn't Adonis, but he appeared to be the greatest man on the planet. I just peeled ahead. I bent down and kissed him on the lips. With all the passion I could muster, I wrapped my arms around him, trying to will all of my feelings for him into his mind. I gently teased his mouth open, and we began kissing frequently. "Francis." And when I looked back into those lovely eyes of his, I realized that he, too, loved me. He may have been 50 years old to my 21, and my father 40, but I adored him. At the end of the market day, we returned to his house, and, as was almost never done, in the large and ornate dining room, with an enormous dining table that could seat 30 people, 3 at each end, and 12 on each side. However, all of the Leafs were not present today, and the area was square, with 3 people on each side. Then he led me to the elevator, and we rode up. He went into his room, expecting me to enter mine. At the very least, he seemed surprised when I followed him into his. It was insanely ornate, a nod to Victorian over-ornamentation. Paintings of his many ancestors, as well as his son and a picture of his shell, adorned the walls of his sitting room and bedroom. I suppose to remind him. He gave me a weak stare as I began to take off my clothes. As I took office, he seemed to offer no resistance. Then we got into bed and made love. Long, passionate, caring love at the pinnacle of my ecstasy. I exclaimed, "Oh God, Greg, I love you, love you, love you." As I settled down next to him, he whispered to me, "I love you too." We fell asleep together. It was the first time I'd ever slept with a man. Last night was the last time I didn't. A year later, we were standing by the same fountain where we had met. I was perplexed because we rarely went there. I knew he was thinking about something, but I wasn't sure what it was. "Oh, Greg." I told him that, oddly, "You seem to be thinking about something very important." When he went down on one knee, my heart started to flutter. I'd been waiting for this for what seemed like forever. When he pulled a box from his pocket, my heart raced. He opened it and found a very old ring. Then I realized I recognized it from his grandmother's painting. I nearly had a heart attack. Everything that meant something to him. He offered it to me. "Mag, sweetheart," he spoke, his voice breaking. "Without you, I am nothing. You did not make me happy. That is not strong enough. You gave me a life and motivated me to live. Will you marry me?" I could feel tears well up in my eyes as I looked down at him. I picked up the ring and placed it on my finger. I felt how unique it was. He couldn't have given more if he had purchased the Hope diamond and set it on a ring. "What took you so long, Mac?" I said, attempting to hide just how pleased I was. He extended his hand, and I accepted it. He began moving as if he were about to kiss it, and then he threw me into the fountain. My head came up, and I sprayed water at him while laughing. He offered me his hand to pull me out, and I dragged him in with me. We began splashing each other. I felt insanely happy, more than I had ever felt in my life. My love was complete. Less than a year later, we were standing in a temple. It was the same temple where his grandparents had been married. I was wearing his grandmother's wedding gown. It just fit me a little tight in the room, where his extended family and my family were both happy. It took forever for my parents to accept this. They only came around and accepted us, after reluctantly meeting us, and seeing the love in our eyes. On the day of our wedding, they had completely accepted us. They even accepted my conversion to Judaism, because I felt compelled to share it with him. No, I did not fabricate it. I studied and studied. I believe he made me believe, because if he could believe after everything that had happened to him, there had to be something worth believing in. A rabbi stood in front of us, reading the traditional wedding vows until he reached ours. "Megan, do you consider this man to be your lawfully married husband? To love, cherish, and comfort one another in sickness and health for the rest of your lives?" My heart fluttered, but I managed to get it out. "I do. Do you consider this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love, cherish, and comfort you in sickness and health for the rest of your lives?" "I do," he stated. "I now pronounce you man and wife." He never finished, because I tackled Greg to the ground in a wonderfully loving hug and kiss. We would never go back. We spent our brief honeymoon at the grand, but slightly decrepit Concord Hotel in Commercial Lake, New York. It was a huge hotel with over 1,500 rooms. Previously, it was one of the world's largest resorts. It had been one of the most beautiful, extravagant, and unquestionably the crown jewel of the Borscht Belt. That was then. It was now a little run down, but it still had character. One thing I knew was that Greg wanted another child to leave the house with, to keep the family going, to make things work. It was extremely important to him. We tried and tried. But after 4 years, we realized it was not working. So I went to get some tests done. We discovered that due to some flaws on my part, I would never be able to conceive, and couldn't carry a child to full term. I broke down crying. I couldn't believe I was so inadequate. I was afraid he'd reject me if I couldn't do this for him. I asked the doctor to tell him for me. I could not bring myself to. When I arrived home, Greg was waiting for me at the door. He picked me up, pretended it was easy, and led me to a couch in the front room. I started crying my eyes out. I was desolate. I was very upset. I couldn't stand the fact that I had failed at being a woman. I assumed that if I couldn't do this for him, he would not love me. He did not love me. He did not love me. He wrapped his arms around me, kissing me gently and nuzzling me with his nose. When he looked into my eyes, he was confused, shocked, and amused. "What the hell? I love you, Meg," he said. "And that's all I need." I sniffled, feeling awful, and decided to reveal the truth. "But I want you, Meg. It's just you." He lifted me and carried me up several flights of stairs. Muscles ache, arthritis, general tiredness. Then one day, he began talking about selling the business. It shocked me. "Meg, darling, we are not going to have any children," he said. "And don't go on about how I'll only love them if you have them. But think about it. If we do not have any children, there's no reason to keep a business just to leave it to them, is there?" "Well, I suppose not," I replied. "I want to retire," he told me. "But you're only—" Holy shit. Yeah. Holy shit. I am 66 years old. John Bon has gray hair, a stooped walk, and slow movements. They had all gradually crept up. But at that point, I really noticed it. I was married to a senior citizen and in my mid-30s. But, you know what? I'd choose him over anyone. I love him. 6 months later, he found a buyer for his business. He received $4 million for it. Enough for us to take an extremely long vacation. He told us we had earned it. And we did. We took the Queen Elizabeth II from New York to Southampton, before transferring to a train for London. We visited London and spent a month training and exploring the country. Then we took the night train, the Caledonian Sleeper, from Edinburgh to London, then another train to Dover, across the Channel to Calais, and on to Paris, where we arrived just in time to catch one of the rare full runs of the Venice Simplon Orient Express. We rode it all the way to Istanbul, not Constantinople, and spent a lot of time traveling throughout Turkey and the Middle East. Then we flew from Tel Aviv to Paris, and spent the rest of our time touring France, Spain, and Portugal. We then took another train to Venice, and toured the hell out of Italy. After visiting Italy, we moved on to Greece before returning to Germany. After Germany, we took the TGV back to Paris and then the night train to Moscow. We enjoyed touring various Russian cities, before returning to Moscow, to take the train to Beijing from there. We flew to Japan and toured it extensively. Then we went island hopping across the Pacific until we arrived in Australia. We arrived in Sydney and took an extensive tour of the iconic city. Then we boarded the Indian Pacific and traveled to Adelaide, where we took the Overlander to Melbourne and the XPT Sleeper back to Sydney. We were exhausted after being away for nearly 2 years. We spent the majority of our time having fun in the city, including a lot of walking in Central Park. 4 years later, everything changed. He fell. Greg suddenly fell. I called an ambulance, and they transported him to the hospital, but he was mostly fine. The doctor simply stated that at his age and condition, he needed a cane. They gave him one of those adjustable aluminum ones, which he despised. I went to a shop in the village that I knew and had an intricately carved cypress cane made for him. It had an 18 CT solid gold knob with a large sapphire set into it. It was my gift to him on his 74th birthday. It had cost a fortune, but he adored it. He was an obviously decrepit old man, but I still loved him. I still snuggled him to sleep, and I worried about the day when he would leave me alone, which came sooner than I wanted. But I wasn't particularly sad about it. I had been with him for over 25 years, which is longer than most marriages nowadays, and we were happy. He could still make me laugh, and I appeared to make him laugh simply by existing. Then I started to feel bad. I did not want to complain about it. I thought I had the flu, but it just dragged on. After 2 months, I collapsed on the floor and woke up in the hospital. I did not have the flu. I had liver cancer. Greg fainted, fell, and broke his arm. As soon as they released me from the hospital pending further treatment, I began working on nursing. Greg is back to health. I may be in pain, but he was immobile for a while. They began treatments and operations quickly, but my health insurance had expired when we sold the business. It didn't seem important. Then I'd be on Medicare when I needed it. I had been very healthy. It cost a fortune, but we had a fortune, which Greg spent. Radiation, chemotherapy, and removal procedures made me feel terrible. However, it continued to metastasize. It kept spreading. They continued to have to treat larger and larger areas. Greg hired the city's best doctors to work on me. He spared no expense, and I continued to feel worse. After 3.5 years, I decided to give up. Most of my pain and decrepitude stemmed from the treatments, so I stopped them. I cornered a doctor and asked him what my chances of survival in 2 years were, and he said practically none. What is the point? Greg was wasting our money like water, and I was going to die regardless. They gave me very strong narcotics, but I was not immobilized. I was not being slowly destroyed. Iatrogenic. The cancer continued to eat away at me, but I was happier. I didn't have to sit there and watch Greg attempt to be brave for me. I could move around, and we could laugh together again. But I gradually began to fade away. For several days, I found myself confined to my bed. There is not enough energy to move anymore. I realized I was about to die. Be strong, Greg. He entered my room. I opened my eyes hesitantly. I looked at his sad but smiling face. Hi, honey, he said. I love you, I replied. And then I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. And then I was in a cloud for a few moments. There he was. I loved him. This was an eternity, and we'd stay together forever. I knew he'd shot himself. But it didn't matter. We were here together, so it couldn't be hell. Am I in heaven? He asked. Then I knew the answer. Because we were together. Here's the next story. It began with a package. A small, unassuming box arrived on our doorstep on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I wasn't expecting anything, but Lauren was always bringing me makeup, clothes, and random junk from those Instagram ads she fell for. I brought it inside, tossed my keys on the counter, and ripped the package open without thinking. And then I froze. Inside, there was only one item, a delicate black lace bra with a small tag still attached. Pricey. She didn't usually buy things like this. Lauren was more of a comfortable cotton and t-shirt kind of woman, especially recently. I held it between my fingers and turned it over in my hands. It was brand new and unworn. At least that is what I thought. I detected the faintest hint of perfume. Not hers. Something deeper. Muscular. It made my stomach twist in ways I didn't quite understand. I was not the type of guy to jump to conclusions. I didn't snoop or hover. We had always trusted one another. So I did what any regular husband would do. I placed the package on the bed and waited for her to arrive home. Lauren entered an hour later, shaking the rain off her coat, her hair damp against her cheeks. She smiled at me, as if nothing was wrong. As if she hadn't just ordered lingerie that she'd never mentioned. Hey, you are home early, she said, removing her boots. I remained where I was, arms crossed. The package is still there, like a silent accusation. Did you get anything delivered today? She blinked. Just a second. Her expression showed a flicker of something unreadable. Oh, she replied, forcing a laugh. Okay, just something stupid. I didn't look away, did not allow her to change the subject. Go ahead and open it. Lauren hesitated. The same flicker behind her eyes. She then reached for the package. Slow and deliberate, as if taking her time to think. When she took the bra out of the box, she gave me the most artificial laugh I'd ever heard. You're making that face, she teased, rolling her eyes. It's just a gift for Haley's bachelorette celebration. I did not say anything. Her best friend, Haley, was getting married in a few months. It was an acceptable excuse. I give her that. Believable enough. If I hadn't already detected the faint aroma of a stranger's perfume on the fabric. If I hadn't noticed how her hands clenched just a little too tightly around the delicate lace. I'd have forced a smile, pretending to accept her response. But something in my gut told me it wasn't just a stupid gift. It was something else. And I was about to find out what. The doubt seeped into my bones like a slow poison. I wanted to believe her. I actually did. But there's something about the way she said it. Her fingers tensed around the delicate piece of lace. It didn't sit well. That night, I barely slept. Lauren, on the other hand, fell asleep easily, curled up on her side as if she had nothing to hide. At 2:17 a.m., I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning in circles. Her phone vibrated. I turned my head slightly to see the screen light up. A message flashed and then vanished before I could recognize the name. But I saw enough to realize it wasn't Haley. The text was short. Only one word. Soon, I felt a dark coil in my chest. I was not the type of guy to go through my wife's phone. That was the line, correct? The unspoken rule of trust in a marriage. But rules only mattered if both people followed them. So I tried something I'd never done before. Carefully. I reached over to take her phone from the nightstand. Her breathing remained even. She didn't move. My heart pounded in my ears as I swiped up the passcode screen. Of course, I guessed her birthday incorrectly. I tried our anniversary. Wrong. I entered my birthday incorrectly. The realization struck me like a slap. She'd changed it. That alone told me all I needed to know. I returned the phone to its original position and lay there in the darkness, my mind racing with questions. Who was she texting at 2 a.m.? Who was waiting for her? Soon. The next day, I decided I wasn't going to sit around being the paranoid husband. I needed proof. Lauren had a routine. Every Saturday, she went to yoga. At 10 a.m., she would leave wearing her favorite leggings. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun, and she had a water bottle in hand. She was consistent, predictable. So, when she left that morning, I followed her. I waited 5 minutes before grabbing my keys and following her car at a careful distance. My heart pounded in my chest, my palms slick against the steering wheel. This was crazy. This felt like something out of a bad movie, but I couldn't stop. I had to know she did not go to yoga. She drove across town to a quaint little cafe, a place where you could have a long, intimate conversation. I parked down the street and watched from inside my car. My stomach turned into knots. Then I saw him. Tall, dark-haired, dressed in a fitted button-down that looked like it came straight out of Cologne. Ad. When Lauren walked in, he was already seated at the corner table. She smiled at him. Not the polite or friendly kind. The kind of smile a woman gives when she wants to be noticed. She sat across from him, leaning in close, her fingers brushing against his wrist while she spoke. I did not need to hear the conversation. I already knew that. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers ached. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps he was a coworker, a friend, or just a random guy who happened to be incredibly attractive and comfortable touching my wife. But then she laughed. Not just any laughter. When we first started dating, she had a soft, breathy, almost shy laugh. She hadn't used it around me in quite some time. Something inside of me snapped. I didn't realize I'd opened the door until I was halfway across the parking lot. My footsteps were steady, my heartbeat varied, but my mind was screaming for me to turn around, to think this through. But I ignored it. I walked directly into the cafe. Lauren had her back to me. The guy, however, saw me first. His expression had barely changed. Just a glint in his eyes before he leaned back in his chair, his arm draping lazily over the backrest. As if he were not surprised. As if he knew exactly who I was. Lauren must have noticed his shift in focus, as she turned to see what he was looking at. When she saw me, she froze. For a split second, I noticed it. The panic, the guilt, the way her body tensed up as if she'd been caught sneaking out a window. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. She forced a smile and leaned back in her chair, as if this were the most common situation in the world. Hello, babe. What are you doing here? I didn't sit down and smile. I kept my voice under control. Funny. I was about to ask you the same question. She blinked, as if she hadn't expected that response. I told you I was going to see a yoga instructor here. Then I looked at him. He was watching me with an amused smirk, as if this were a game. I turned back to Lauren. So, did they move yoga to a cafe? Or are you just here to do some deep stretching exercises? I motioned toward the man. What is your name, by the way? The man chuckled under his breath. Derek. Of course, his name was Derek. Lauren rolled her eyes as if I were the one acting ridiculously. God, don't be so dramatic. This is only a friend. I ignored her. Derek, do you usually have coffee dates with married women who are supposed to be doing yoga? Derek did not even flinch. He simply took a slow sip of his coffee and set the cup down with infuriating calmness. I think you should ask your wife about it, man. Lawrence's eyes widened slightly. Just a second. And that was when I realized she hadn't expected me to show up. I never expected to be caught. And now that she lacked a script for this. I looked at her, daring her to say anything. She did not. I exhaled sharply and nodded to myself. Then he said nothing else. I turned and walked away. I could feel her gaze on me the entire way, but she did not follow. I drove aimlessly for an hour. The city blurred past me in streaks of color, cars, buildings, and people going about their business as if my world hadn't just broken open. I should have gone home, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Lauren did not even try to stop me. Didn't run after me. Did not call or text. The silence told me everything. When I pulled into our driveway, the anger had subsided into something colder, sharper. I was not going to sit in the dark, stewing in doubt, while she walked through the front door with another lie. Ready. I wanted to hear her say it. I wanted to see if she had the courage to look me in the eyes and tell me the truth. So, I waited. An hour later, she arrived home. Not rushed, not stressed, just normal. As if she hadn't been caught in a lie. As if she hadn't spent her morning laughing with another man while I sat there, watching her slip away from me. She set her keys on the counter and sighed as she looked at me. Are we actually going to do this? I nearly laughed. Do what, Lauren? My voice was also calm. Calm. She crossed her arms and shifted her weight to one leg. You are acting crazy. I was drinking coffee with a friend. That's it, friend. I nodded slowly. Right. And I am just supposed to believe that? Did she throw her hands up? Yes, because it's true. I studied her, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. She kept shifting and fidgeting, as if her skin was betraying her. I'd known this woman for nearly a decade. I knew she was lying. She was lying now. I leaned forward and placed my hands on the counter between us. Okay. If he's only a friend, let me see your phone. Lauren flinched. Just barely, but I saw it. She then scoffed and shook her head. Absolutely not. I tilted my head. Why not? Because it is private. She snapped, clutching her purse as if I was about to take it from her. I did not blink. Did not move. Give me one valid reason why I can't see it. Her jaw clenched. Because it is mine. I exhaled slowly. Did you change your passcode? That took her off guard. Just a second. But it was sufficient. She recovered quickly. She rolled her eyes. Yes, because you're being paranoid. I don't have to justify my privacy because you suddenly became insecure. Insecure? That word landed harder than it should have. It was a cheap shot, but she knew precisely where to aim. I nodded, swallowing back the bitterness that rose in my throat. Right. Of course. I am the problem. Lauren sighed and rubbed her temples, as if she were the one exhausted by everything. Look, I am done with this conversation. If you want to be mad, then be mad. But I am not going to stand here and let you interrogate me for nothing. Then, just like that, she turned and walked towards the bedroom. Conversation is over. Except, it wasn't over. Not even close. Because the second she disappeared down the hallway, her phone, which was still in her purse, buzzed. I did not touch it. Did not need to. The screen briefly lit up, allowing me to see Derek's name and the message. Did he believe you? I had never felt such rage in my life. That I sat there, staring at the glowing screen as if it were a sick joke. Did he believe you? The arrogance. The absolute confidence in that text made my skin crawl, as if I were some idiot stumbling around in the dark while everyone laughed behind my back. My heart pounded in my ears, and my hands clenched so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. I could have grabbed her cell phone. I could have stormed into the bedroom and pushed it in her face. Demanded an explanation. I watched her squirm, but I did not want to tell another lie. I did not want to hear her try to get out of this one. No, I preferred something better. I needed proof, something irrefutable, something she couldn't gaslight me out of. So I stood up, grabbed my keys, and walked straight back out the door. I had a buddy, James, who worked there. He's a smart guy. He was a little obsessed with conspiracy theories, but he was well versed in technology. A few years ago, he assisted me in locating a scammer who had hacked my mother's email. If anyone could help me right now, it was him. 20 minutes later, I was knocking on his door. James opened it with a beer in one hand and a raised brow. Dude, you appear to be about to commit a felony. Close. I muttered as I stepped inside. He closed the door behind me. All right. What's up? I did not sugarcoat it. Lauren is cheating. I need proof. James whistled softly. Damn. I did not see that coming. He took a sip of his beer, then looked at me. Are you sure? I pulled out my phone and showed him the photo I took of Lauren and Derek in the cafe. Then I showed him the text I'd just noticed on her lock screen. James let out a slow breath. Yes, that is not good. Nope. He ran his hand through his hair. All right. What type of proof are we discussing here? I need to access her messages. Her calls and her location. Anything that explains exactly what she has been doing. James shot me a long look. You realize this could backfire, right? I tightened my jaw. She has already thrown away our marriage. I simply want to know the truth. James nodded and then cracked his knuckles. Okay, let's burn this asterisk and edge to the ground. 2 hours later, I had everything I needed. James had successfully cloned Lauren's phone onto an old device, capturing every text she sent. Every call she made, and every location she visited would be displayed to me in real time. The moment he handed me the phone, it vibrated in my palm. Lauren, a new message. He did not push too hard. I think we're fine. Then Derek responded. Derek told you he's not very smart. I focused on the screen, my vision narrowing to a pinpoint. Not very smart. Not very smart. I smiled. Let's see how smart you think I am considering I barely slept that night. Not because of rage. It wasn't even rage anymore. It was something colder. Sharper. The kind of clarity you get when you finally stop ignoring the truth. Staring you in the face. Every time her phone vibrated, I saw it. Every lie, every plan, every disgusting little message that they exchanged. Lauren. I told him about yoga, but he showed up at the cafe. I covered it. Derek. Damn. Do you think he suspects Lauren? Perhaps a little. But I handled it. I always do. Derek, you're really good at lying. It's hot. Lauren. Stop. You'll make me want to see you again soon. Derek. Then do it. You won't know. I sat in bed, watching the texts come in, while Lauren lay next to me, breathing steadily. She fell fast asleep, as if she didn't care about anything. She was good at lying. Too good. But she had a fatal flaw. She believed I was stupid. By the morning, I had a plan. Lauren moved through the house as if everything were normal. She kissed my cheek, poured her coffee, and hummed quietly as if she weren't actively betraying me. It was almost impressive. I played along. I smiled when I was supposed to. She appeared distracted when she claimed to have arrived at work early. I even kissed her goodbye at the door, as a good little husband. Then I picked up my keys and followed her. This time, I knew exactly where she was headed. Derek's apartment. She parked 1 block away. Smart. I parked farther away. I watched as she walked toward a sleek building, phone in hand, smiling at something on the screen. Possibly another of his messages. I could have stormed in right away. It could have caused a commotion, but that's what she expected. Instead, I took out my phone and dialed a number that I hadn't called in years. Hello, Mrs. Caldwell. When she picked up, I told her it was Jake. Yes, I realize it's been a while. Listen, I need a favor. See, Mrs. Caldwell was our former landlord. And what about landlords? They are familiar with many people. Individuals who install security cameras. People who can extract footage. Within an hour, I had what I required, and by evening, I had something even better. Lauren walked through the door that night, and I was already home. She appeared radiant, with flushed cheeks and slightly messy hair, as if she'd been running her hands through it. She'd showered. Of course she did. But I swear I caught the faintest whiff of that musky cologne. She smiled at me. Hello, babe. I smiled back. She had no idea that while she was at work, one had been sitting in my car for hours, watching the entrance to Derek's building that I had seen her walk into disappear, then casually stroll out, as if she hadn't just blown up. Our marriage. She had no idea I had security footage of her entering his apartment. She had no idea I had logged every text, call, and excuse in my phone. She had no idea the game had already ended, so I let her go about her night. Allow her to cook dinner, talk about her day, and pretend everything was fine because the longer she lied, the sweeter it would be. When I finally laid down my cards the following morning, I set the trap. Lauren was already awake when I arrived downstairs, holding her phone in one hand and a coffee mug in the other. She looked up at me and gave me a lazy smile. Morning, babe. She spoke as if she were not currently juggling a husband and a side piece. I poured myself some coffee, taking my time and letting her believe I was still playing dumb. Then I casually leaned against the counter and asked, So, what's the plan today? Yoga again? It was subtle, but I got it. The half-second pause, the way her fingers tightened around her mug before she forced another smile. No, actually, I have a lot of work to catch up on. I might just stay late at work. One nodded and sipped my coffee. This makes sense. She relaxed a little. Right on cue, her phone buzzed. She tipped the screen away from me too quickly. I watched her read the message and then locked the screen as if nothing had happened. Derek, I already knew what it said. It's my place again. I can't stop thinking about you, Lauren. I will come by after work. He will not notice. She assumed I wouldn't notice. I nearly laughed. Instead, I set down my coffee, stretched, and said, Hi. Since you'll be working late, do you mind if I stop by and bring you dinner? She froze mid-sip. Her eyes shifted to mine. Her expression was carefully neutral. Oh, that's nice, but you don't have to. I shrugged. I want to. She paused. I just have a lot to do, and I'm not sure when I'll be free. Oh, that's fine, I replied easily. I will just surprise you. Lauren smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. Babe, I don't want you to drive all that way for nothing. I do not mind. Her smile wavered. Then she laughed as if I was being ridiculous. You're acting weirdly. I just smiled. Nothing weirder than usual. She laughed again, and I could see it now. Cracks are forming, and the edges are fraying. She was scrambling for control of the conversation, hoping to steer it away from dangerous territory. All right. Well, I need to leave, she said, grabbing her purse. She kissed my cheek as she always did, but this time I recognized what it was. A performance. Love you, she said. I looked her in the eyes and smiled. I understand. And with that, she was out the door. I waited exactly 15 minutes before picking up my keys and following her. She did not go to work. She didn't even pretend to go directly to Derek's apartment like clockwork. I parked down the street and watched her go inside, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction that I had been correct all along. Then I made a phone call. Hello, James. I said when he picked up. Remember the thing we talked about? A pause, followed by a chuckle. Are you ready to set it off? Yeah. All right, man, give me 10 minutes. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my seat, watching the entrance to Derek's building. Lauren believed she was untouchable. She had no idea her world was about to crash down. That I did not move. Didn't blink. I sat in my car, watching the entrance to Derek's building like a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated. James, it's finished. My lungs let out a slow, satisfied breath. I'd asked James for one thing: access Lauren's work email. Unlike her phone, she had never changed the password because she didn't think she would need to. And now? Every email she and Derek had sent ended up in my inbox. I opened the first one. Lauren. I can't stop thinking about last night. He does not even touch me like that anymore. Derek, you are mine now. He does not need to know another Lauren. I feel bad sometimes, but then I see you, and it all goes away. Derek. He is boring. He will never excite you the way I do. I gave a low chuckle. Boring. That was the newest one. There were dozens of such plans. Rendezvous inside jokes at my expense. She had sent sloppy texts. Take care with her calls. But emails. Emails were forever. And now I have them all. I scrolled up to the most recent one, which was sent just last night. Lauren. I keep considering leaving him. But not yet. Not until I know you genuinely want this. My hands clenched. So that was it. She waited to see if Derek was fully committed before making her move. She was treating me as a backup plan. How poetic. I sighed slowly and returned my gaze to the entrance. She was still indoors. She was lost in her own little fantasy world. She was completely unaware that the ground beneath her was about to shatter. I was finished waiting. I stepped out of my car, adjusted my jacket, and walked straight to Derek's building. It's time to end this. The elevator ride to Derek's floor was like a countdown. A slow, steady ticking precedes impact. When I got to his door, I did not knock. I did not hesitate. I pressed my hand against the handle and pushed to unlock. How convenient. The door swung open, revealing a sleek and modern apartment. Minimalist furniture and expensive decor. This is the kind of place Derek would have. Lauren stood in the middle of the living room, wrapped in his arms. For me, her back was her head. Tilted upward, lips are dangerously close to his. She hadn't noticed me yet, but Derek was looking over Lauren's shoulder, landing on me. And for the first time since we met, I noticed something new in his expression. Lauren, you should panic, I said with a calm voice. She stiffened immediately. Then she slowly turned, her face drained of color as she noticed me standing there. I could see the gears turning in her head, the way her breath hitched as she tried to piece together an explanation. An explanation. Anything to get out of it. But I was not there for her. Lies. I took out my phone, held up the screen, and scrolled through every disgusting message and email. Every piece of evidence she had carelessly discarded. Her lips parted slightly. No words. No excuses. Only pure, unfiltered horror. Derek took a step back to clear his throat. Listen, man. I fixed my gaze on him, my voice icy. Say nothing. He did. Lauren finally discovered her voice. Jake and I smiled. And then in a commercial tone. Possible, I replied, as my wife handed me divorce papers as a gift. I just smiled and said, we'll see how your lover reacts. Just like that. I placed a thick envelope on the coffee table, turned around, and walked away. Lauren's sharp intake of breath was the last sound I heard before the door swung shut. Let her determine which was worse. Losing me or discovering that Derek was not as eager to take my place as she had hoped. For the first time in weeks, I felt a weight lift from my chest as soon as I stepped out of Derek's apartment. I was not drowning in doubt. The anger, the betrayal, it was all still burning beneath my skin. But now it had a purpose, and a direction. Lauren had spent months playing her little game, manipulating, lying, and treating me like a fool while testing the waters with Derek to see if he was worth the risk. Well, she had her answer. And the look on Derek's face told me exactly how this was going to go. Lauren was not a prize. She was a liability, and Derek, he was not looking for baggage. He was looking for fun. The thrill, the stolen moments. Secret meetings, the thrill of sneaking around. But now the fun was over. Now it was real. Derek didn't appear to be the type of guy who sought authenticity. I didn't stick around to witness the aftermath. I did not need to. An hour later, I was at home, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my wedding ring. I'd already taken it off and placed it beside a manila folder containing everything Lauren had attempted to conceal. Every piece of evidence, including emails, texts, screenshots, timestamps, and security footage, is presented in black and white. She couldn't twist this. She couldn't gaslight her way out. There was nothing left to argue about. I heard the front door swing open, followed by fast and uneven footsteps. Lauren. I didn't look up as she walked in, but I could sense the panic radiating from her. Her breathing was quick and shallow, as if she'd run all the way here. Jake. She spoke, her voice tight. We need to talk. I finally lifted my head to look at her. Her hair was a mess, and her makeup had smudged. She hadn't even bothered to make herself presentable. That was new. What is there to talk about? I asked evenly. Lauren gulped hard. Jake, please allow me to explain. Exhaled slowly. What exactly are you explaining? That you've been sneaking around with Derek for several months. That you have been lying to me every day. That you were waiting to see if he wanted you before deciding whether to throw me away. She flinched, as if the words were physically painful. I never intended for this to happen. I laughed without humor. That is the best you have. I was perplexed. She rushed out. Things between us had been off for a while, and I wasn't sure how to fix it. And Derek It just happened. Confused? I repeated, shaking my head. No, Lauren. It's not uncommon to bump into someone in a grocery store by accident. You've been actively lying to your husband for months. Sneaking around and covering your tracks. That does not just happen. That is a choice. Tears filled her eyes. I didn't care. I love you. She whispered, her voice cracking. I swear, I do. I looked at her, unaffected. No, you don't, Jake. If you truly loved me, you would not have done this. I simply said, if you loved me, you wouldn't have planned this. You wouldn't have tested the waters with Derek, as if I were a backup, in case things didn't work out. A single tear ran down her cheek. It was not like that. I raised an eyebrow. It was not. I picked up my phone, scrolled for a second, and then turned it towards her. Lauren. I keep considering leaving him, but not yet. Not until I know you genuinely want this. Her face crumpled. I put the phone down. You aren't crying because you regret something. You're crying because you were caught. She let out a shaky breath, staring at the folder on the table. She knew what was inside. She whispered, this doesn't have to be the end. This is something we can fix. I will do anything. Jake. Therapy and counseling. Do whatever you want. I studied her for a long time. Then I asked, where is Derek now? Her lips parted slightly. What? Where is Derek? I repeated. She paused for too long, and that told me everything. He'd already distanced himself. She ran back because she realized she was about to lose everything. I leaned back in my chair. Yes, that is what I thought. Lauren gave a quiet sob. Jake, please. I stood up. She became silent. I picked up the folder and set it in front of her. My lawyer's name and phone number are inside. Everything is already ready. Her hands trembled as she gazed at it, as if touching it would make it a reality. Then, softly, I spoke the words that sealed it. You can't break me and then beg me to stay. With that, I walked away. Lauren did not move. He did not speak. Did nothing but stand there, staring at the divorce papers, as if they were a ticking explosive, counting down to the end of everything she thought she could control. I walked upstairs, grabbed my already packed duffel bag off the bed, and slung it over my shoulder. The moment I saw Derek's first message, I knew I was ready for this. I was not going to stay in this house and let her beg, plead, or twist the truth to fit whatever story she needed to make herself feel better. She made her decisions, and I was making mine. When I returned downstairs, she was still frozen in the kitchen. Her hands gripped the counter so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She looked up at me, desperation flashing through her tear-filled eyes. Are you really leaving? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I did not respond right away. I just took a slow breath, allowing the weight of it to settle. The house felt different now, as if it was no longer mine. Perhaps it never really was. Lauren, you've already left first. I said, my voice soft but firm. I am just catching up. She made a choked sound that sounded like a sob mixed with a breath. But I didn't stick around to console her. That wasn't my job anymore. I walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped out. The air was crisp and cool against my skin. The world was still turning. The sun still shines. People are still going about their lives, as if my house had not just burned down. And yet, for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. As I stepped from the porch, my phone vibrated inside my pocket. I took it out, expecting another message from James or my lawyer, but it was an unknown number. I frowned and then opened it. Unknown, I guess she ran back to you. Derek. I exhaled sharply and shook my head while typing my response. Mina, I just walked away first. Then, before he could respond, I blocked his number. I tossed my bag into the passenger seat of my car, climbed in, and turned on the ignition. Without hesitation. No second thoughts. I pulled away from the house. I did not look back. Lauren had made the bed. She could now lie in it alone.